It's welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Every Harry Potter fan has imagined receiving that wax-sealed letter, boarding the Hogwarts Express, and stepping into a vast castle full of magic and mystery. But in reality, life at Hogwarts might disappoint you, because the house system, which seems logical at first glance, is actually full of oddities and downright absurdities. Today, we're diving into the most illogical aspects of Hogwarts house life. Enjoy watching. Number 1. The house sizes just don't add up. From the movies and books, it feels like Hogwarts is packed with students. But when you tally the names mentioned, it turns out each year per house has maybe 10 to 12 students. That means the whole school has generously around 800-900 students. At most. That's it? For all of Wizarding Britain? Seriously? The Ministry of Magic employs what seems like thousands. Where did they all graduate from if Hogwarts produces so few wizards? Or is the magical birth rate in Britain lower than that of unicorns? Number 2. Teachers can't enter house common rooms. Even professors, we learn, can't freely enter students' common rooms. Just like the students, they need a password, must answer a riddle, or meet some requirement to get in. Now imagine an emergency and a Ravenclaw student is in danger and the potions professor rushes to help, only to be stuck outside solving a riddle. Where's the logic? Where's the safety protocol? And above all, where's the basic care for students? Number 3. Students are banned from visiting other common rooms. You're 11 years old, homesick, and find out you can't even visit your brother or sister if they were sorted into a different house. In fact, most students don't even know where the other common rooms are. Is this a school or a secretive spy academy? Why does Hogwarts restrict friendships across houses? Instead of unity, students are pushed into isolation and rivalry, sometimes escalating into open hostility. That's hardly magical. Number 4. Curfew doesn't apply to common rooms. We all remember wandering the corridors at night is forbidden. Break that rule, and Filch will gleefully string you up by your ankles. But inside the common rooms, students can party till sunrise and no one seems to care. McGonagall gave them a mild scolding once, and even that had no consequences. So apparently you can host full-blown celebrations, but just don't step into the hallway. Where's the line between breaking the rules and perfectly fine? Number 5. Quidditch team tryouts. Total mystery. Each house has its beloved Quidditch team, but how do you even get on it? Harry was accepted in his first year. No tryouts, just a teacher's recommendation. Then the team lineup stayed static for years. In his 6th year, Ron had to try out, even though he'd already played before. So how does this system work? Are there official standards? Or is it all about favoritism and who the captain likes best? It feels less like sports and more like an old boys' club. Number 6. Where are the bathrooms in common rooms? One of the weirdest oversights, not a single mention of bathrooms in the house common rooms. We know about the prefect's bathroom and that they once brewed polyjuice potion in an abandoned girl's toilet. But what if nature calls at night? Do students have to break curfew just to pee? And if caught, how do they prove they weren't sneaking off to the Forbidden Forest but just needed the toilet? Was this part of the school's design, or did J.K. Rowling just not want to talk about it? Number 7. Siblings almost always get sorted into the same house. Sure, it sounds convenient and cozy, but doesn't that defeat the purpose of sorting based on individual traits? Why does family history seem to matter more? Among the Weasleys alone, we see obvious candidates for other houses. Charlie would have made a great Hufflepuff and Percy a textbook Slytherin. Yet everyone ends up in Gryffindor. Maybe the sorting hat was just tired of arguing and didn't want to deal with Molly Weasley's wrath. Number 8. House tables separate students unnecessarily. At every meal in the Great Hall, students sit at long tables, split strictly by house. Gryffindors with Gryffindors, Slytherins with Slytherins. No one crosses, no one mixes. Even friends like Luna Lovegood and Ginny Weasley Ravenclaw and Gryffindor rarely share a meal. When Luna joins the Gryffindor table in Half-Blood Prince, it feels like an exception, not the norm. "You can sit with us," Ginny says kindly, and Luna does. But that moment stands out because it's so rare. Why should kindness between houses be unusual? What happens if you want to sit with your friend from another house? What if you're dating someone across the hall? The tables act like invisible fences. No rules are written, but the culture says, stay in your lane. And so from breakfast to dinner, Hogwarts silently reinforces the idea that your house is your world. Everyone else is other. Even the act of sitting together becomes a quiet rebellion. And not enough students dare. Number 9, open bias against Slytherin. The Great Hall was draped in green and silver. Slytherin banners hung high. They had won the House Cup, fair and square. The entire table was beaming until Dumbledore stood and said, "However, recent events must be taken into account." In front of the entire school, he handed out last-minute points to Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville. Exactly enough to knock Slytherin off the podium. The banners changed mid-celebration. The Slytherins watched their victory vanish in seconds. No explanation, no defense, just silence and humiliation. That wasn't a lesson in fairness, that was public punishment. From that point on, the message was clear. Slytherins were the villains of the story, even when they followed the rules. Teachers scolded them more, trusted them less. Even McGonagall once snapped, "Why is it always Slytherin?" when trouble arose. But maybe it was because Slytherins were always treated like trouble. When the system paints you as the enemy, what choice do you have but to wear the mask they gave you? Maybe Slytherin didn't create its own darkness. Maybe Hogwarts did. Number 10, no way to switch houses if needed. When Harry first met the Sorting Hat, it hesitated. "You could be great, you know," it said. "It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness." But Harry whispered, "Not Slytherin," and the hat obeyed. That moment proves one thing. There's room for choice, but only once. In that chair, on that first day. After that, the decision is final. No questions, no reassessments, no second chances. Even if a student changes completely over the years, their house remains a permanent label. What if Luna Lovegood had been sorted into Hufflepuff instead of Ravenclaw? Her kindness and empathy would have fit perfectly. Or what if Neville, who grew into a true leader, had started in Hufflepuff where he might have felt safer, more accepted, less judged? But Hogwarts doesn't ask. It doesn't check in. There's no quiet conversation at the end of first year to ask, "Do you feel like you belong?" Instead, students are left to adapt or suffer in silence. The house becomes your identity, whether you grow into it or not. For a school that teaches transfiguration, it resists transformation in its own students. No transfer forms, no appeals. No letters home offering a review, just a sorting, a banner, a dormitory, and silence. In the real world, people grow. They change. They rethink who they are. But in Hogwarts, your 11-year-old self decides the course of your next 7 years, and you're stuck with it. Number 11. House prefect selection feels arbitrary. The day prefect badges were handed out, Hermione Granger nearly fainted with excitement. She had earned it. Top marks in every subject, a strict sense of justice, an obsession with following rules. "Me, a prefect, but I've been breaking rules left and right with you two," she said, stunned. But Harry didn't get a badge. Instead, it went to Ron Weasley. Even Mrs. Weasley was shocked. "That's everyone in the family," she beamed, then paused. Except Fred and George and Harry. No one could explain why. Ron had never shown leadership. He wasn't a top student. He often mocked rules, got into trouble, and didn't show particular initiative. Even he looked surprised. "Prefect? Me?" he asked, blinking. Harry had saved the Philosopher's Stone, found the Chamber of Secrets, fought Dementors, competed in the Triwizard Tournament. He risked his life again and again. He led. He protected. Yet when the time came to pick someone to represent Gryffindor, the professors said no to him and yes to Ron. The logic never made sense. If it was about academics, Hermione should have been chosen years earlier. If it was about leadership, Harry was the natural pick. If it was about loyalty, Neville Longbottom had proven more grit than half the school. But the truth is, we never learn how prefects are selected. There's no voting, no student input, no public criteria, just a quiet decision made behind staff room doors and delivered like fate. Maybe Dumbledore believed Harry had too much on his shoulders already. Maybe McGonagall thought Ron needed a boost. But these are guesses the school never explains. In a place that emphasizes fairness, transparency, and reward for effort, the prefect system feels like a backstage game. Students just accept it, even when it confuses, even when it stings. Because in Hogwarts, authority isn't questioned. It's worn like a shiny badge. And number 12, houses ignore personal growth. Neville Longbottom stepped onto the train to Hogwarts as a shy, clumsy boy who couldn't even remember where he put his toad. The Sorting Hat barely hesitated. It placed him in Gryffindor. Courage? Bravery? None of that was visible on the surface. In his first year, Neville was terrified of standing up to teachers, to his classmates, even to stairs that moved too fast. Ron once said Neville's got about as much spine as a chocolate frog. And yet the Hat believed in something not yet there, something unproven. For most of his time at Hogwarts, Neville didn't feel like a Gryffindor. He was scared of Snape. He struggled in classes. He shrank in the shadow of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. No other house would have demanded more from someone like him. Hufflepuff would have embraced his loyalty. Ravenclaw would have appreciated his quiet intelligence in herbology. But Gryffindor, it expected boldness, fire, and for years he felt like he didn't belong. That weight could have broken him. But he changed, bit by bit. By 5th year, he fought in the Department of Mysteries. In 7th year, he led the rebellion at Hogwarts. When Harry asked the Sorting Hat why it had placed him in Gryffindor, Neville admitted, "The Hat did tell me I had a lot of courage, but I suppose it just took a while to show." He became the kind of person his house expected. But what if he hadn't? What if the pressure to fit in had pushed him down instead of lifting him up? Hogwarts assumes that 11-year-olds are already who they're going to be. It doesn't allow for change, no re-evaluation, no second sorting, no recognition that people grow. Not everyone has Neville's resilience. What happens to a student who changes in the opposite direction? Who starts brave, then becomes cautious? The system doesn't ask, it doesn't adapt, it just labels you early and expects you to wear that label forever, whether it fits or not. Number 13, house points are given randomly. When Professor McGonagall caught Harry flying on a broom without permission in his first year, she didn't take any points at all. Instead, she gave him a spot on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. But when Neville got caught out of bed during the same night, she immediately took away 50 points. No warning, no conversation, just a swift, crushing punishment. That one decision dropped Gryffindor from the lead to last place overnight. The entire common room turned on Neville, one boy's mistake, and suddenly he was the enemy. That's the power a single teacher's opinion holds in the house point system. There are no written rules, no chart that says being late equals -5 or bravery equals +10. It's all guesswork. One day, Snape gives Draco Malfoy 5 points for answering a question about werewolves. The next, Hermione Granger solves a problem far more difficult in Transfiguration and gets nothing. When Ron swore loudly in class, he lost 5 points. But when Crabbe nearly started a fight, no one said a word. The system doesn't just feel unfair, it teaches unfairness. Students learn quickly that your house and your teacher matter more than your actions. The worst moment came during the final feast in Harry's first year. The hall was decorated in green and silver. Slytherin had won. They'd earned it. But then, one by one, Dumbledore stood and handed out extra points to Gryffindor. 50 to Ron, 50 to Hermione, 60 to Harry, and finally 10 to Neville. 170 points out of nowhere, the banners on the ceiling magically changed to red and gold, and just like that, Slytherin's year of effort vanished. There were cheers from one side of the hall, and stunned silence from the other. Even fair victory, it seemed, could be rewritten at the last second. For a school that claims to teach discipline, Hogwarts offers its students a lesson in chaos. Points can be given for friendship, for being polite, for standing up to friends, or not at all. They can be taken away for sneezing in the wrong direction. And no one ever asks why. There's no accountability, no explanation, just coloured hourglasses on the wall, filling and emptying with gems, a game dressed up as a system. And for the students caught in it, the message is clear. Fairness is a matter of who's watching. Number 14. Houses create artificial conflicts. On his very first day at Hogwarts, Draco Malfoy turned to Harry Potter and said, "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort." That moment didn't just introduce Draco as a Slytherin, it revealed the heart of the problem. From the second, students are sorted into houses. They're not just labelled, they're divided. The house system doesn't encourage unity. It encourages rivalry, not friendly competition, but deep, bitter loyalty to one side and mistrust of the others. And the younger you are when it starts, the stronger that division becomes. The Gryffindors cheer when Slytherin loses points. The Slytherins boo when Gryffindor scores a goal. Even teachers play along. Professor Snape famously deducted points from Hermione Granger for being an insufferable know-it-all while letting Draco's snide remarks pass without a word. The rules aren't the same for everyone. They shift depending on the house. That creates a warped sense of justice. Students learn not to respect others, but to win at any cost for their own group. When the final feast of Harry's first year turned into a last-minute victory for Gryffindor after Dumbledore handed out extra points like sweets, it didn't teach fairness. It taught that some houses are just favoured. This isn't just about winning and losing, it's about how students view each other. Ron Weasley, raised in a family of Gryffindors, didn't hesitate to say, "There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin." That's not a schoolyard taunt. That's a lesson learned from the system itself. No one teaches students to work with people outside their house. No one tells them how to build bridges across those walls. Instead, they're taught to stay loyal to their colour, their common room, their house, and in a place meant to nurture young minds, that division quietly poisons the atmosphere. By the time Harry reaches his 6th year, even he, boy who once begged the Sorting Hat not to place him in Slytherin, doesn't question the separation anymore. He trusts Gryffindors. He avoids Slytherins. Collaboration is rare. Suspicion is the norm. The system molds them all, not into a community, but into factions, into sides, into people who wear house badges not just with pride, but with suspicion toward anyone who wears another. Number 15. Heads of house are clearly biased. In the polished halls of Hogwarts, where stone walls echo with centuries of wisdom and magic, the house system stands as one of the school's most iconic traditions. It promises to group students by values, bravery, cunning, intelligence, and loyalty, and give them a sense of belonging. But behind the grandeur of coloured banners and the cheers of the House Cup lies a system that often favours partisanship over fairness, and the most curious part? Those tasked with maintaining discipline and justice, househeads themselves, are often the worst offenders. Take Professor Severus Snape, head of Slytherin House, as a primary example. His behaviour towards Gryffindors, especially toward Harry Potter and his friends, repeatedly crosses the line of professional conduct. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape deducts points from Hermione for showing off her knowledge, even though she correctly answers a question in class. When Neville Longbottom accidentally melts his cauldron, Snape blames Harry not because Harry did anything wrong, but because he simply can. This kind of favoritism is not subtle, it's systemic and unrelenting. Snape's protection of his Slytherins is not rooted in care, but in bias. Even the most blatant offences are ignored if the offender belongs to Slytherin. Draco Malfoy routinely bullies fellow students, insults Muggleborns, and violates rules, but rarely faces consequences from Snape. When Draco calls Hermione a mudblood in Chamber of Secrets, it's Ron who is punished for defending her, not Draco for the slur. Snape simply brushes it off, calling it a nasty little epithet without disciplinary action. The message is clear: the househead is not a judge, but a defender of his own. Snape's actions are not just biased, they actively cultivate animosity. When he unfairly docks points or overlooks Slytherin transgressions, it fuels resentment among the other houses. Gryffindor and Slytherin become bitter rivals not solely because of their differing values, but because their authority figures deepen the divide. It's not competition, it's war, ignited by the people who should be neutral. This environment is not educational, it's combative, and students, young and impressionable, learn that authority is not about fairness, but favoritism. Yet the issue is not exclusive to Slytherin. Professor McGonagall, head of Gryffindor House, while generally more restrained, has her own moments of bias. She has an undeniable soft spot for Harry and his friends, and though her favoritism is not as cruel or obvious as Snape's, it's still present. When Harry, Hermione, and Ron break dozens of school rules to save the Philosopher's Stone, McGonagall is initially shocked. But once they succeed, Dumbledore swoops in to award last-minute points to Gryffindor, helping them clinch the House Cup. McGonagall says nothing against it. Instead, she beams with pride. There's an illusion that McGonagall is fairer because her house wins through nobler actions. But in truth, the mechanism is the same. Professors enable and defend their own. She doesn't penalize Gryffindors with the same rigidity she applies to others. Even when Harry receives a broomstick, a blatant breach of school norms, McGonagall not only allows it, but purchases it for him. A first year, with a school-supplied broom, would have been grounded for less. Yet the rules bend when it comes to Gryffindor's Quidditch hopes. The Quidditch rivalry further exemplifies this dynamic. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry's Nimbus 2000 is destroyed by the Whomping Willow, McGonagall ensures he gets a firebolt, the fastest broom in the world. Though she pretends to confiscate it for safety inspections, she doesn't object to it becoming part of the Gryffindor team arsenal. If a Slytherin student had suddenly appeared with an illegal broom, the reaction would likely have been outrage. But for Gryffindor, it's a celebrated advantage. These actions, though seemingly minor, shape the school's culture. Students begin to associate justice not with right or wrong, but with loyalty and favoritism. A student like Neville, who struggles academically but is brave and loyal, is often overlooked unless he fits the Gryffindor mold. Luna Lovegood, eccentric and intelligent, is mocked by her peers and not fiercely defended by any professor, not even her own head of house. There is no impartial system of support. The professors wear their colours too boldly. What makes the problem deeper is the students' growing awareness. They begin to anticipate the biases. Gryffindors expect leniency from McGonagall. Slytherins know Snape will protect them. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs, without strong narrative presence or dynamic househeads in the spotlight, become spectators in a system that seems designed for the Gryffindor-Slytherin war. The other houses rarely win the House Cup. Their achievements are less frequently recognized. They are not protagonists in the story that Hogwarts writes every year. This favoritism seeps into punishment and reward. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, Fred and George are ambushed by Malfoy's gang during a Quidditch practice, it's the Gryffindors who are punished, not the Slytherins, who provoked the situation. Snape bans Harry from playing Quidditch indefinitely, a punishment disproportionate and clearly fueled by personal dislike. McGonagall is furious but powerless to reverse it. One might ask, where is the impartial oversight? Even the House Cup, intended as a celebration of achievement and teamwork, becomes a spectacle of favoritism. At the end of Philosopher's Stone, Slytherin is set to win. The hall is decorated in green and silver, But Dumbledore suddenly awards enough last-minute points to Gryffindor to snatch victory from their hands. To Mr. Potter, for pure nerve and outstanding courage, I award 60 points, he declares. The entire system of point tracking is undermined in seconds. This is not about fairness, it's a public display of bias. The emotional toll of this partiality cannot be overstated. For every triumphant Gryffindor, there's a disappointed Hufflepuff or overlooked Ravenclaw who has worked just as hard but receives no recognition. For every protected Slytherin, there's a Gryffindor punished for speaking out. It cultivates a school culture that values victory over unity and loyalty to house over loyalty to truth. Number 16, sorting hat is not a perfect system. In the great hall of Hogwarts, where candles float and shadows dance along stone walls, an ancient ritual determines the future of every student. All it takes is a battered, magical hat perched upon a child's head, murmuring words no one else hears. Within seconds, sometimes minutes, it calls out a house, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin, and the child's path is sealed. This singular moment defines friendships, dormitories, teachers, and even values. But beneath the romanticism lies an unsettling question. Can a magical hat, no matter how old or enchanted, truly capture the complexity of a human soul? The sorting hat, as old as Hogwarts itself, is not infallible. It's not a seer, not a mind reader in the absolute sense, and certainly not a divine judge. It is a relic that once belonged to Godric Gryffindor, infused with the wisdom of the four founders, yet even that wisdom was limited, shaped by their time and their biases. This is crucial because the sorting hat operates under ancient parameters. It seeks traits like bravery, intelligence, loyalty, and ambition. But what of children who carry all four, or none? What of the quiet rebels, the clever risk-takers, the loyal intellectuals? It sorts based on archetypes, and archetypes, by nature, reduce complexity to something palatable. Take Hermione Granger. Her intellect rivaled any Ravenclaw's, and her obsessive love for learning often eclipsed her daring. She once remarked, "I'm hoping for Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best." The hat considered Ravenclaw, yet placed her in Gryffindor. Was it a reflection of her courage, or simply a nod to her desire? The moment suggests the latter. The sorting hat is not blind to personal preference. It listens, it yields, and in doing so it loses its claim to objectivity. This isn't a meticulous assessment, it's a negotiation, sometimes even a concession. Nowhere is this clearer than with Harry Potter himself. The hat lingered on him longer than most, murmuring that he would do well in Slytherin. But Harry, scarred by rumours and preconceptions, begged otherwise. Not Slytherin, not Slytherin, he thought with desperation. The hat obliged. Well, if you're sure, you'd better be Gryffindor. The scene is charming in its tension, but disconcerting upon reflection. The hat acknowledged Slytherin as a suitable match, and still rejected it because a frightened boy whispered no. Does this suggest that fear and opinion outweigh suitability? That a child's first instinct is more reliable than a hat's ancient magic? One might argue that choice is important. Dumbledore himself later tells Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are far more than our abilities." But this only muddies the issue. If choice defines us, then why rely on the sorting hat at all? Why stage a ceremony where a child is essentially branded for 7 years based on a fleeting mental exchange with a talking hat? The process becomes more theatrical than practical. It's a rite, not a science. Consider Neville Longbottom. Timid, awkward, and terrified of his own shadow, he begged the hat to put him in Hufflepuff. It refused. "You do well in Gryffindor," it insisted, and so he was placed. It's tempting to view this as foresight. Neville, after all, became a hero. But what if the hat had simply forced him into a mould he didn't fit? What if, instead of growing into bravery, he suffered from years of alienation, thinking himself a failure because he didn't match the Gryffindor ideal? His transformation was not inevitable. It was the product of struggle and trauma. Was that the Hat's plan or a lucky accident? Draco Malfoy, sorted instantly into Slytherin, never had a chance to challenge expectations. His father, Lucius, had been a Slytherin. The family legacy demanded it. The Hat, likely sensing his pride and ambition, went along without pause. But what if Draco had been tested? What if he had been shown another path? He was clever enough for Ravenclaw, loyal to his family to the point of self-destruction. Traits Hufflepuff would have honored. The Hat never tried. Or worse, it never dared. The entire system of house sorting is based on the idea that identity is fixed at age 11, that a child's innermost traits are already formed, already visible, already measurable. But children change, traumas shape them, friendships define them, teachers mold them. To assume that one moment, one mental scan captures their essence is to deny the very notion of growth. Luna Lovegood, eccentric and insightful, would have thrived in Gryffindor or even Hufflepuff, yet she was placed in Ravenclaw. Did the Hat see her mind and ignore her heart? Even more baffling is the lack of re-evaluation. The sorting hat never returns. It never checks in. What if a student realizes a year later that they were misplaced? There is no process for change, no appeal, no second opinion. Imagine being trapped in an identity you no longer recognize, surrounded by people you cannot connect with, performing a role that never suited you. That's not guidance, that's indoctrination. It's telling that the sorting hat once feared its own obsolescence. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, it sings a song warning of division, urging unity. Oh, know the perils, read the signs, the warning history shows, for our Hogwarts is in danger from external, deadly foes. It begs the houses to unite, to look past labels, yet it continues to enforce those labels. The contradiction is staggering. It calls for harmony while perpetuating tribalism. Number 17, House Cup, devalues actual achievements. There is a moment at the end of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that might seem heartwarming, triumphant even. The Great Hall, decked out in Slytherin green, ready to celebrate their long-awaited victory, is suddenly transformed. Albus Dumbledore, with a twinkle in his eye, delivers a series of last-minute point awards to Gryffindor students. Neville for standing up to his friends, Ron for a game of chess, Hermione for cleverness, and Harry for sheer bravery. The red and gold banners unfurl as Gryffindor snatches victory from Slytherin in the final seconds. But beneath the cheers and applause there lies a quiet, unsettling question. What does the House Cup truly represent? Throughout the school year, students compete for house points, earning them through academic achievements, good behavior, and helpfulness. It's a system meant to encourage consistency, diligence, and teamwork. Yet this structure collapses when arbitrary decisions override months of quiet effort. Consider the students of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, houses known for intelligence, loyalty, and hard work. These are the students who show up early to class, who study late into the night, who help clean up the greenhouse without being asked. But when the final reckoning comes, none of that matters. Their steady dedication is swept aside by a few acts of last-minute drama. It is not the act of rewarding courage that is problematic. What matters is how and when it's done. The House Cup is presented as a symbol of cumulative excellence, not spontaneous heroism. When Dumbledore gives Harry Potter 60 points for bravery, it is well earned in the context of a larger story. Harry faced death, went beneath the castle, and confronted Lord Voldemort. But his reward is not an isolated one. It tips the scale entirely, handing Gryffindor a victory that feels less like justice and more like favoritism. Even Hermione, who was scolded by Professor McGonagall for her sheer dumb luck earlier in the year, is now praised for her logic. There's no consistency, only the illusion of one. This undermines the legitimacy of the system itself. If the House Cup is a measure of collective achievement, how can it be decided by 4 acts performed by 3 first years? Where are the points for the 7th year prefect who helped a struggling second year through charms? Where is the recognition for the Slytherin who spent all year excelling in potions and tutoring others in secret, perhaps out of pride or shyness? Their stories are invisible because they do not end in fanfare. Their victories are not public enough to be noticed. The most striking example of this imbalance lies in the way Neville Longbottom's 10 points are presented. Dumbledore says, "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends." The sentiment is beautiful. Neville's courage in trying to stop Harry, Ron, and Hermione from breaking school rules is indeed admirable. But in the logic of the school year, this act does not compare to months of steady work by hundreds of students, and yet it is enough to win the cup. The moment is emotionally satisfying, but narratively, it feels hollow. By rewarding the dramatic over the disciplined, the House Cup becomes less a trophy of merit and more a prop for storytelling. It serves the narrative arc, not the ethical lesson. It teaches students that being at the center of an adventure is more valuable than doing your homework every day. It implies that danger and chaos are worth more than quiet support or behind-the-scenes responsibility. Hogwarts, the greatest school of witchcraft and wizardry, sends a message that the spotlight is everything. This also has implications for how the houses are viewed. Slytherin is consistently vilified, yet they win the House Cup through traditional means, high academic performance and strategic thinking. It's easy to dislike them when the narrative paints them with suspicion, but their victory, before it is stolen, is legitimate. There is no indication that they cheated or manipulated their way to the top. Their reward is taken not because they failed, but because someone else had a more cinematic journey. That is not justice. That is performance. The problem deepens when one considers the values each house is supposed to embody. Hufflepuff prizes hard work, patience, loyalty, and fair play. Yet these virtues are rarely, if ever, honored in the House Cup results. Ravenclaw values intelligence and wit, but their contributions are often dismissed as mere cleverness, not heroism. Gryffindor's bravery is held up as the supreme virtue, so much so that it justifies reshaping the rules at the 11th hour. This imbalance teaches children that some virtues matter more than others, not through curriculum, but through the culture of reward. This is not just about feelings, it's about structure. If a school builds a year-long system of incentives and then overrides it for the sake of drama, what does that say to the students who quietly play by the rules? It says that their work can be erased at any moment by someone else's story. It says that fairness is flexible, depending on who's in the spotlight. It's difficult not to see this as a kind of betrayal, one that discourages long-term effort in favor of memorable moments. Even Severus Snape, who is otherwise criticized for his bias, remains consistent in awarding and removing points based on clear behaviors. He may be harsh, but his logic is usually grounded in the rules. Dumbledore, by contrast, breaks the system in a single night. He transforms the House Cup into a stage performance where the script favors drama over discipline. This is a disservice to all students, not just those who lost. Number 18, houses don't teach different magical styles. In the great castle of Hogwarts, with its moving staircases and enchanted ceilings, the system of 4 houses is hailed as one of the school's most defining traits. Students are sorted at the age of 11, their personalities judged by a hat steeped in centuries of tradition. Gryffindor values bravery, Slytherin prizes ambition, Ravenclaw honors wit, and Hufflepuff rewards loyalty. But beyond the songs and speeches, the crimson, emerald, blue, and yellow of scarves and banners lies a curious truth. The sorting has no real bearing on the magical education students receive. They walk through different common rooms, sleep in different dormitories, and cheer for different Quidditch teams, but in the classroom they are indistinguishable from one another. Hermione Granger, a Gryffindor, sits beside Ernie Macmillan, a Hufflepuff, during herbology. They both follow the same textbook, 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, and are graded on identical criteria. Terry Boot, a sharp-minded Ravenclaw, takes the same Transfiguration exam as Draco Malfoy, a Slytherin. There is no Ravenclaw-exclusive lesson on theoretical transfiguration or Slytherin-only seminar on dark defense. Each subject is taught uniformly. The teachers don't adjust their lessons to house values or traits. Professor Flitwick teaches charms with the same cheerful enthusiasm, regardless of whether his students wear red, green, yellow, or blue ties. One might have expected a system in which each house delved into a different magical philosophy. A Hogwarts where Slytherins explored strategic and pragmatic spells, perhaps even studying the ethics of power. A Ravenclaw curriculum might center around rare incantations, magical theory, or experimental enchantments. Hufflepuffs could be guided toward practical, nurturing branches of magic, healing, herbology, magical creatures. Gryffindors might have intensive training in combative magic, defense, and magical courage. But this vision is not reality. The magical education is standardized. Everyone studies the same syllabus, takes the same Albluels and Newties, and is expected to master the same core spells. In Defense Against the Dark Arts, a subject that could easily accommodate varying approaches, the instruction is uniform. During their third year, the entire year, regardless of house, faces boggarts in Professor Lupin's class. There is no house-specific curriculum for confronting fear. Neville Longbottom, a Gryffindor, is asked to confront Severus Snape in his grandmother's clothes, just as a Ravenclaw or Slytherin student might be. There is no evidence that students are taught to defend themselves in ways that reflect their house traits or personal strengths. The illusion of individuality is strongest during sorting. The sorting hat whispers about destinies and inner natures, but once the hat is off, everyone queues for the same classes. There is no sorting of magical method, no development of personal magical philosophy based on house. The only real differences emerge in the common rooms and the dormitories. Social lives may vary, house points are won or lost, but the fundamental experience of magical learning remains identical. It's as though the house system was designed for division, not development. Harry Potter's journey illustrates this contradiction. He is a Gryffindor through and through, brave, impulsive, fiercely loyal. Yet in potions he is judged not on courage but on precision and obedience. In astronomy he learns the same constellations as every other student. His magical identity, so tied to his house in the public eye, has no influence on the way he is taught. He succeeds or fails on academic terms that ignore the very house traits that supposedly define him. Consider Luna Lovegood, the quintessential Ravenclaw. She is dreamy, odd, imaginative, a walking embodiment of her house's eccentric reputation. Yet her education is no different from any Hufflepuff's. She studies the same defensive spells, memorizes the same potion ingredients. Her magical creativity is not fostered by the school structure, it flourishes despite it. The House of Intellect does not provide her with special access to magical texts or mentors in arcane theory. She reads the Quibbler, not because Hogwarts encouraged her to, but because her father did. The absence of curricular differentiation calls into question the very purpose of the house system. If houses are meant to group like-minded students together, why does Hogwarts not capitalize on that grouping to tailor education? Why not teach Slytherins the intricacies of magical contracts and negotiation? Why not let Ravenclaws debate magical ethics or invent spells? Instead, the house identities fade in the classroom, resurfacing only in interpersonal dynamics or during the House Cup. When Professor McGonagall teaches Transfiguration, she doesn't treat her Gryffindors with special attention, nor does she adjust her style when teaching Ravenclaws. The emphasis is on performance, not potential. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she declares, and every student, regardless of house, is expected to meet the same standard. There is no acknowledgement that different students might benefit from different approaches based on their natural inclinations or the values instilled by their house. Even the elective system does little to break this monotony. In third year, students choose from subjects like arithmancy, care of magical creatures, and divination, but these options are open to all houses equally. Hermione famously uses a time turner to attend multiple electives, but she is not participating in a Gryffindor curriculum. She is simply pursuing personal interests. Again, the house structure offers no academic guidance or direction. It does not nurture talent. It merely groups students by an initial psychological assessment and leaves their magical growth to the general curriculum. In many ways, this rigidity undermines the rich potential of magical education. Hogwarts could have been a place where identity and magic are intertwined, a place where being in Hufflepuff meant mastering restorative charms or animal empathy, where Slytherins learned to harness ambition through subtle spellcraft, and Gryffindors were trained to face danger with strategic bravery. Instead, Hogwarts produces generalists trained in a uniform system differentiated only by house pride and personality conflicts. The tragedy of Severus Snape underscores this point. As a Slytherin and a brilliant student, he developed a personal passion for the dark arts and potion-making. He created spells such as Sectum Sempra that never appeared in any Hogwarts curriculum. Yet his talent was not cultivated by his house or teachers. It was born of loneliness, obsession, and secrecy. The system did not guide him. It left him to explore magic in solitude. His house label was not an academic compass, merely a social tag. The same holds true for Tom Riddle. A Slytherin prodigy, he too invented spells, explored the boundaries of magical knowledge, and bent the rules of magic to his will. But Hogwarts did not teach him how to wield ambition responsibly. It did not provide ethical frameworks tailored to his traits. His house sorted him, yes, but it did not teach him. In many ways, the failure to differentiate magical education may have helped turn Riddle into Voldemort. He was left alone with his power, and no one offered a structured way to use it well. The uniform curriculum also erases the opportunity for magical philosophy. If every student learns magic the same way, what room is left for innovation? Where is the space for unorthodox approaches, for questioning, for crafting new theories? The greatest wizards in the series, Dumbledore, Snape, Voldemort, all pursued knowledge outside the school structure. Hogwarts taught them the basics, but their genius emerged in defiance of the standard method, not because of it. That should raise questions about what Hogwarts truly values, conformity or curiosity. Even the physical spaces of Hogwarts reflect the lack of academic individuality. The common rooms are beautiful, each with its own atmosphere, but the classrooms are all the same. Stone walls, blackboards, desks in neat rows. There are no Slytherin-only laboratories or Ravenclaw towers of magical experimentation. The environment for learning is as neutral as the curriculum. The house system, for all its fanfare, has no influence on pedagogy. Ultimately, Hogwarts seems more concerned with sorting students than with developing them. The sorting ceremony is a dramatic moment, complete with whispered secrets and declarations of identity, but after that, the real work of magical education begins, and in that arena the houses are irrelevant. A student's potential is not shaped by the traits the sorting hat named. It is shaped by their own curiosity, their friends, their traumas, and their resilience. The house system does little to support or challenge them. The colours, the cheers, the rivalries, they make for good stories and strong memories, but they are surface. Beneath them lies a sameness that robs Hogwarts of what could be its greatest strength, the ability to teach magic in a way that honours the uniqueness of each young witch or wizard. House system promises difference but delivers uniformity. In doing so, it risks failing those students who might have soared under a different, more personal form of guidance. Number 19, no mentors or emotional support for students. In the cold, drafty corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and ghosts drift silently through stone walls, one expects that behind every enchanted door lies a world of wisdom, safety, and structure. Yet beneath the polished floors and flickering candlelight, there is an invisible gap in the very system that claims to shape the future of the wizarding world. For all its grandeur, Hogwarts lacks one fundamental support: adult mentors dedicated to the emotional and psychological development of students beyond the classroom. Despite the presence of heads of houses like Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape, who balance teaching, discipline, and house responsibilities, there is no designated figure, no consistent, accessible adult whose sole role is to guide young witches and wizards through the personal storms of adolescence. This oversight is not only baffling, it's also deeply troubling. Consider the case of Neville Longbottom, a boy raised by a strict grandmother, carrying the weight of his parents' tragic fate in St. Mungo's. Neville enters Hogwarts uncertain, timid, and painfully aware of his own perceived inadequacies. In the Philosopher's Stone, he is mocked by Draco Malfoy, forgotten by teachers, and even loses house points for trying to stand up for what he believes is right. While Professor Sprout, his head of house, is kind and gentle, she is primarily his herbology teacher. There is no evidence that she ever pulls Neville aside to ask how he's coping with his trauma, or if he needs help managing the pressure of being constantly compared to other, more confident Gryffindors. A faculty mentor not involved in grading or discipline might have seen through the awkward silences and offered the encouragement he needed years earlier. Students at Hogwarts are expected to navigate complex social, academic, and emotional terrain on their own. The Sorting Hat places them into houses at age 11 based on fleeting impressions and perhaps even their own insecurities. Yet after this dramatic moment, the emotional scaffolding disappears. There are no regular check-ins, no safe adult presence to help them process the burdens they carry. The Hogwarts Express delivers them to a castle of magic and mystery, and then leaves them to figure out who they are, often in the shadows of immense expectations and dangerous adventures. Take, for instance, the journey of Harry Potter himself. The Chosen One arrives at Hogwarts as an orphan who spent 10 years in an abusive home. He is famous for something he doesn't remember doing. In his first year, he is nearly killed by Professor Quirrell. In his second year, he is suspected of being the heir of Slytherin. In his third year, he learns his godfather is a fugitive. Throughout all this, Harry receives no psychological guidance. Dumbledore, wise as he is, chooses distance and cryptic clues over emotional availability. Harry is left to cope with trauma through whispered conversations in dormitories or quiet walks with Hagrid. In the Order of the Phoenix, he even states, "I just feel so angry all the time, a cry for help that echoes in the void because there is no one assigned to listen." The lack of non-teaching mentors is especially glaring during the upper years when academic pressure mounts and questions about the future loom large. When Hermione Granger considers dropping Muggle studies in favour of a time-turner-fueled schedule, she speaks only to Professors McGonagall and Dumbledore. But both are bound by institutional roles, thinking primarily in terms of magical education, not holistic well-being. No one ever asks Hermione why she feels the need to push herself so hard. No one guides her through the anxiety of straddling two worlds, Muggle and magical, or the identity crisis that must come. With being brilliant, yet constantly threatened by those who see her as less than for her bloodline, then there is Draco Malfoy, arrogant, smug, and cruel on the surface, but underneath, a boy born into a legacy he didn't choose. By 6th year, he is trembling in bathrooms, unable to kill, watching his hands shake under the pressure of Voldemort's task. He breaks down, alone, over a sink, while moaning Myrtle, a ghost, is the only one who hears his pain. No adult ever intervenes, not even Snape, who is supposedly looking out for him. Imagine the power of a neutral mentor, unaffiliated with discipline or Death Eaters, who could have helped Draco untangle the fear from the pride, the expectation from the self. The burden of leadership also falls too early and too heavily on certain students. House prefects and head boys and girls are expected to keep order, offer guidance, and serve as role models. But they are still teenagers. Percy Weasley takes this role with obsessive seriousness, alienating his own family in the process. He confuses authority with value, rules with identity. A mentor might have helped Percy understand leadership beyond ambition and softened his eventual estrangement. Without such guidance, Percy's self-worth becomes entangled with institutional approval, a fragile foundation that crumbles in times of moral crisis. Luna Lovegood is another painful example. Brilliant, strange, and deeply kind, she is often mocked and dismissed. Her peers steal her belongings and hide them. Teachers notice but do not act. There is no adult Luna can go to who doesn't also grade her or possibly see her as a distraction. She learns to cope alone, developing a world of imaginary creatures and emotional detachment. But what if she had a mentor who celebrated her uniqueness and validated her voice? Who told her that being different doesn't mean being wrong? Even the friendships that form, often Hogwarts' greatest strength, cannot replace the need for adult support. Ron Weasley is the sixth son in a poor, boisterous family. At Hogwarts, he struggles with being overshadowed, feeling second best in nearly every room he enters. His jealousy of Harry is not a flaw of character, but a symptom of insecurity. When he abandons Harry and Hermione in the Deathly Hallows, it is not an act of betrayal, but the cracking of pressure no one helped him carry. A mentor might have helped him articulate that pain long before it boiled over. Students are also expected to face death and war without proper emotional tools. Cedric Diggory is murdered during the Triwizard Tournament. His body returns cold and lifeless, and the school carries on with a closing feast. There is no counselor, no grief circle, no adult guiding students through collective mourning. The trauma lingers in silence. In The Half-Blood Prince, the corridors echo with anxiety, but still, there is no one officially trained to address fear or loss. The closest thing to a counselor Hogwarts offers is Hagrid, kind-hearted but emotionally overwhelmed himself. The structure of the house system seems designed for loyalty and competition, but not for healing. Inter-house conflict is encouraged through point systems and public shaming. When Slytherins lose points, they are humiliated before the whole school. When Gryffindor wins, they are celebrated extravagantly. No one mediates these dynamics or helps students interpret them beyond tribal pride. A house mentor could offer perspective, could help a Slytherin process the frustration of being seen as the bad house, or a Hufflepuff explore why their quiet loyalty matters just as much as showy bravery. The absence of dedicated psychological support becomes especially jarring in the aftermath of war. After the Battle of Hogwarts, the school is damaged, bodies lie in the Great Hall, and the survivors are teenagers covered in dust and blood. There is no mention of therapy, no evidence of post-trauma care. George Weasley loses his twin, Ginny loses friends, Neville loses more than we can name. Yet there is no indication that the school introduces any new role to address what these young people have endured. The very system that raised them, flawed, courageous, magical, simply continues. Hogwarts prides itself on being a home. Dumbledore often refers to it as such, but a home provides more than shelter and challenge. It provides safety, acceptance, and support. For many students, Hogwarts is their only home, and while the magic within its walls is dazzling, there is something more essential that is missing. Someone to ask, "Are you all right?" and stay to listen. Not to grade, not to judge, just to listen. A mentor, a guide, a human anchor in a world of shifting staircases and ancient spells. Number 20. Some houses get better living conditions. In the magical halls of Hogwarts, a castle steeped in tradition, grandeur, and mystery, there lies a curious oversight so deeply embedded in the school's very foundation that few ever stop to question it. The four houses, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, are not merely student communities or social groups. They are physical spaces, separate realms within the same institution, and from the moment the sorting hat declares your fate, you are bound to that territory for the rest of your schooling. But what if this very structure is flawed? What if the infrastructure of these houses reveals a quiet injustice that no one, not even the most enlightened wizards, ever tried to correct? Gryffindor students live in a tower high above the rest of the castle, with sweeping views and a cosy common room filled with armchairs, tapestries, and a roaring fireplace. Slytherins reside in the dungeons, yes, but their space is described as elegant, with greenish light from the lake casting an eerie but beautiful glow on the stone walls. But what of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff? We are told little about their quarters, and what we do learn paints a telling picture. Ravenclaw Tower is known only for its bronze knocker and riddling entrance, while the Hufflepuff common room is located by the kitchens, somewhere underground, with low ceilings and earthy decorations. The detail given to these descriptions is uneven, and the tone is subtly dismissive. When Harry first sees the Gryffindor common room in the Philosopher's Stone, the narration describes a cosy round room full of squashy armchairs, a roaring fire, and a tower view. That image is planted in the reader's mind as the gold standard of comfort. Contrast this with the first and only full description of the Hufflepuff common room, given not in the main novels but in an interview with J.K. Rowling. It's low-ceilinged, earthy, and filled with plants and copper. While charming in its own way, it lacks the grandeur and prestige associated with Gryffindor's or Slytherin's quarters. Why does this matter? Because comfort and aesthetics subtly influence self-worth, community pride, and one's sense of importance in a place like Hogwarts. The students of Gryffindor not only get the most prominent tower, but also the most attention in the narrative. They are given the best light literally and metaphorically. Harry, Ron, and Hermione never once comment on their dormitory being too cold, too dark, or too damp. Meanwhile, Slytherin's location, though underground, is presented as exotic, prestigious even. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron sneak into the Slytherin common room using Polyjuice Potion, it's described as a long, low underground room with rough stone walls and silver lamps hanging from the ceiling. It was furnished with greenish lamps and a fireplace over which hung a carved mantelpiece bearing a massive serpent. There's a chill to it, but also elegance. There is power in the design. Compare that to what little we know of the Ravenclaw common room, which Luna Lovegood eventually guides Harry to in the Deathly Hallows. The room is airy and circular, with arched windows that show the mountains beyond. It is beautiful, perhaps even ethereal, but its defining feature is the logic-based entry system, which requires students to solve a riddle. While intellectually stimulating, it also introduces an element of exclusivity and pressure. A tired, overwhelmed student can be locked out simply for being too stressed to think clearly. It's a system that favors a certain mindset, not necessarily intelligence. Meanwhile, Hufflepuff's common room is the only one with barrels and secret rhythms required to gain entry. If you get the rhythm wrong, you're doused in vinegar. This is not just inconvenient, it's humiliating. Why would only one house be subject to such a trap? What does this say about how the founders viewed fairness? Where is the equal footing? Surely, in a school meant to educate and uplift young minds, the very spaces in which students eat, sleep, and relax should offer equivalent levels of comfort, beauty, and dignity. There is also the matter of natural light. Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, both in towers, are bathed in sunlight. Slytherin gets the mysterious underwater glow. Hufflepuff, located near the kitchens, is underground without any hint of windows. Imagine spending 7 years in a place where you never see daylight unless you leave your common room. This is not a trivial inconvenience. It has real psychological consequences. Lack of sunlight affects mood, energy, and overall well-being. Is it any wonder that Hufflepuff is the house most often dismissed or mocked? Their physical environment reflects and perhaps even reinforces this marginalization. Even the beds vary in prestige. Gryffindor dormitories, we are told, have four-poster beds with rich hangings, woolen blankets, and thick curtains. These are luxury details. Nowhere are we told what kind of beds Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw students have. Are we to assume they are the same? Or is their omission a quiet signal that these details are unimportant, or worse, inferior? It is the silence that speaks loudest. A school that prides itself on fairness and inclusion should not allow one group of students to live in splendor while another sleeps under low ceilings navigating booby-trapped entrances. The idea of house pride is central to Hogwarts life. Students are encouraged to identify with their houses, to compete, to defend them. But pride is not just cultivated through values or friendships, it's rooted in daily experience. The beauty of your common room, the warmth of your bed, the charm of your house's design. All these shape how students feel about themselves and each other. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Gryffindors see themselves as brave because they live above it all, looking down at the world like noble protectors. Hufflepuffs are told they're humble and hard-working, but their home suggests they are also meant to remain unnoticed, close to the ground, in the service quarters of the school. This spatial inequality mirrors deeper themes. Consider the way professors interact with houses. Professor Snape openly favors Slytherin. Professor McGonagall is firm but fair with Gryffindor. Sprout is kind but rarely prominent, and Flitwick, though brilliant, is almost invisible. Even in staffing there is imbalance. Slytherin and Gryffindor have heads of house who are major narrative players. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff's heads are background figures. This lack of presence both reflects and reinforces the lower status of their students' environments. It is not enough to say that the founders had different visions. The founders built these spaces 1,000 years ago, yes, but tradition without adaptation becomes stagnation. Would a modern wizarding school tolerate such disparities in dormitories and student facilities? Would any headmaster today allow one house to have a lake view and another to be punished by vinegar barrels? Hogwarts claims to educate all equally, but the lived reality is different. Physical space is power, and in Hogwarts, that power is unequally distributed. No student chooses their house. The sorting hat does, though it claims to consider the students' wishes. In most cases, it places them where it thinks they belong. Once sorted, students have no opportunity to transfer, no chance to experience life in another house's quarters. They remain locked in one physical and social identity, shaped as much by their environment as by their personality. This rigidity does not encourage growth, it enforces hierarchy. Hogwarts might teach transfiguration and potions, but when it comes to the infrastructure of student life, it practices inflexible tradition. And yet no character in the books ever questions this system. Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not even Hermione. Perhaps they are too immersed in the system to see its flaws. But imagine a young Hufflepuff student, quiet and creative, living 7 years in a low-ceilinged basement while their Gryffindor peers bask in sunlight and soft furnishings. What message does that send? That some children are meant for towers and some for kitchens, that some deserve riddles and others deserve vinegar. Even the way common rooms are protected suggests inequality. Gryffindor uses a password, simple, straightforward. Ravenclaw demands intellectual performance. Hufflepuff uses rhythm and punishment. Slytherin too uses a password, but theirs is hidden in the depths of the dungeon, accessible only to those who know the way. The level of barrier to entry varies greatly, and none of it seems designed with student well-being in mind. Rather, it seems to reinforce the very stereotypes the houses are based on. Perhaps the most unsettling part of all this is how easily we, as readers, accept it. The wonder of Hogwarts, its magic and charm, blinds us to its quiet injustices. We fall in love with the moving staircases, the talking portraits, the enchanted ceilings, but we do not ask, why do some students get sunlight while others get barrels and vinegar? Why does no one propose a redesign, a rotation, A merging of common spaces? Must every aspect of this school be tied to a 1,000-year-old blueprint? If Hogwarts is to be truly great, it must do more than preserve history. It must challenge it, and in the very stones of its castle there are cracks, not magical ones but human ones. Cracks that show a school built not for equality but for separation. And perhaps in the end, the real magic is in seeing it clearly and asking why no one else ever did. Number 21. No real interaction between houses. In the grand halls of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and ghosts drift through walls, the division of students into 4 houses is celebrated as a cornerstone of magical education. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff and Slytherin, each meant to represent a different virtue, a different strength of character. Yet hidden beneath the ceremony and tradition lies a flaw so deep and so overlooked that it quietly shapes the lives of every student who passes through the castle's ancient gates. For all its magic, Hogwarts offers students the troubling possibility of spending 7 full years among the same group of people without ever needing to understand or connect with those from different houses. This is not merely a quirk of school design. It is a failure that can shape character, breed prejudice, and stunt the very growth that the magical world so desperately needs. Take, for example, the case of Slytherin House. From the very first book, it is cast in shadow. When Harry first meets Draco Malfoy, the boy warns him that associating with the wrong sort, Hufflepuffs and worse, Gryffindors, is a mistake. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others," he sneers. Later during the sorting, Harry begs the sorting hat not to put him in Slytherin, having already absorbed the idea that the house is somehow corrupt. "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin," Harry repeats. And just like that, a child with no real knowledge of the school is already making social decisions based on gossip and a few sentences. He never once attempts to befriend a Slytherin in any meaningful way, and neither do Ron or Hermione. This is not just a personal failing, it is a structural one. The school provides no push, no framework, and no requirement for students to cross these lines. The problem becomes clearer when you consider the daily life of a Hogwarts student. They eat at their own house tables, sleep in their own house dormitories, attend most of their classes with their housemates, and compete in house-exclusive activities like the House Cup. Even the common rooms are protected by passwords and secret entrances, as though the houses are castles within a castle. There is no reason, outside of romantic interest or the occasional conflict, for a student to interact with someone from another house. It is entirely possible for a Ravenclaw to graduate from Hogwarts having had no more than a dozen conversations with someone from Hufflepuff. How can such a system prepare anyone for the real world, where cooperation, empathy, and communication are essential? This isolationism isn't merely theoretical. We see it in the way characters misunderstand or stereotype others. In Order of the Phoenix, the arrival of Luna Lovegood, a Ravenclaw, stuns even Hermione, who had never interacted with her before despite being in the same school for years. "She's a bit, well, you know," Hermione says, lowering her voice. But Luna, though eccentric, is wise, brave, and loyal. She proves herself repeatedly, yet remains an outsider throughout much of the series. Her very existence as a surprise is proof of the system's failure. Luna is not strange because of who she is, but because no one has been forced to know her. No mixed group projects, no cross-house clubs where such a bond might have been formed, just division masquerading as tradition. Consider also the Tri-Wizard Tournament. When Beauxbaton and Durmstrang visit, students marvel at the different magical traditions. Yet even within their own walls they are strangers to the diversity Hogwarts already holds. The tournament, despite being international, still encourages house rivalries. Harry, the Gryffindor champion, becomes a source of envy rather than unity. The divisions deepen. Hufflepuff turns against Harry for supposedly stealing Cedric Diggory's spotlight. "You should have let someone else." "Try, Harry," Cedric's friend says coldly. The lines are not blurred, they are drawn darker. There are, of course, rare exceptions. Dumbledore's army, founded in Order of the Phoenix, is one of the few moments where house boundaries are crossed. In the Room of Requirement, students from Gryffindor, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff train together, united by shared purpose. For the first time, we see what Hogwarts could be, what it should be. Yet even here, Slytherins are excluded, not by rule, but by culture. The assumption is that they cannot be trusted. When Marietta Edgecombe betrays the group, her Ravenclaw status does not protect her from scrutiny. The lesson is not that betrayal exists in all houses, but that Slytherins are inherently disloyal. This myth, unchallenged by any official program or school policy, persists unbroken. The sorting itself ensures this division from the very beginning. On a child's first day, at the tender age of 11, they are told they belong in one house, based on traits that may or may not define them for life. Neville Longbottom, for instance, is sorted into Gryffindor despite his timid nature. The sorting hat believed in his potential, but how many others are misjudged or placed among people with whom they share little? And once sorted, there is no opportunity to change. The decision is final. Imagine being placed in a house where you feel no kinship, and then being forced to remain there for 7 years with no escape, no re-evaluation, and no integration with others. Even teachers unconsciously reinforce the divides. Professor McGonagall shows favoritism to Gryffindors, Snape to Slytherins. In Philosopher's Stone, Snape openly bullies Harry in class, favoring Draco and his gang. "I see no difference," Snape says when Harry and Ron argue that Hermione should not be insulted, and yet he gives Slytherins leniency and praise. The message is clear: loyalty to your house matters more than fairness or justice. In this environment, students learn to defend their own and attack the rest. Empathy becomes secondary to loyalty, unity a foreign concept. The social cost of this is immense. Friendships remain narrow, shaped not by shared values or personalities, but by arbitrary sorting. Ron, Harry, and Hermione never become close to Ernie Macmillan or Hannah Abbott. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas are Gryffindors, and thus part of the group, but Susan Bones or Terry Boot are never given the same attention. These are not background characters, they are students who exist within the same school walls, but the house system renders them invisible to the story, and by extension, to each other. When war comes to Hogwarts in the final book, the cost of isolation becomes painfully obvious. It is only in the heat of battle that students are finally forced to work together. Even then, Slytherins are mistrusted. McGonagall orders them escorted from the school not because they have done anything wrong, but because they are Slytherins. Pansy Parkinson suggests handing over Harry to Voldemort and is immediately shouted down, but no one questions why she would think such a thing. The system that raised her taught her to distrust everyone else and to protect her own. In a twisted way, she was simply doing what the school had conditioned her to do. There is an irony in all this. Dumbledore, the great advocate for love and understanding, presides over a school where students rarely learn to love or understand those different from themselves. In his final speech in Goblet of Fire, he says, "We are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided." And yet his school, by design, encourages division. It is a contradiction that is never addressed. The very structure of Hogwarts undermines the values its leaders claim to cherish. The magical world, fractured as it is by blood status and tradition, needs a generation of witches and wizards who can bridge divides. Instead, it raises children in echo chambers. The Weasleys despise the Malfoys and vice versa, yet neither family is given a chance to change that narrative. Imagine if Draco and Ron had been forced to work together in a trans-house project. Imagine if Hermione had spent time with Millicent Bulstrode, not just as a one-off Polyjuice prank, but as part of a real academic exchange. What might they have learned? What might have changed? The damage is not only to inter-house relations, but to personal development. A child who only interacts with those like themselves may never be challenged to grow. They may never have to explain their beliefs, consider another point of view, or develop the social skills needed to lead and listen. Hogwarts, in preserving its ancient traditions, sacrifices something essential: the opportunity for its students to become better people through diversity. It is not enough to sort children by character. They must be given the chance to grow beyond that first impression. The house system as it stands does not promote unity. It enforces tribalism. And while bravery, intelligence, loyalty, and ambition are worthy traits, they mean little in isolation. Real strength comes from connection, from understanding, from the uncomfortable and necessary work of building bridges. Hogwarts, for all its wonder, forgets this lesson, and until it remembers, it will continue to raise children in silos, each convinced of their own virtue and suspicious of everyone else. Number 22. Kids of all ages live together without rules. The Gryffindor common room was loud the night Harry arrived for the first time. The crackling fire, the burst of cheers, the pressing warmth of the crowded room. Everything collided in a swirl of noise and movement. But amid the magic of that first evening, an unspoken chaos simmered just below the surface. 11-year-old Harry, freshly plucked from a cupboard under the stairs, now shared living quarters with students who were nearly adults. Seventh years lounged with proprietary ease in the best chairs, their laughter low and self-assured. First years hovered near the edges, unsure where to sit or speak, caught in an invisible hierarchy that no one ever explained, but everyone obeyed. It was a system that promised unity through house loyalty but delivered confusion through forced cohabitation. The concept of house identity was powerful: bravery, cunning, intellect, loyalty, but it lacked nuance when applied to such vastly different age groups. Hogwarts didn't account for the developmental gaps between a child just learning to tie his tie and a teenager preparing for magical final exams. In Muggle schools, age-based classes exist for a reason, but at Hogwarts, students aged 11 through 17 were thrown into the same common rooms, same dormitories, same shared spaces, expected to bond under the banner of a shared trait. No handbook described how this arrangement should work. There were no assigned mentors, no formal code of conduct within the house beyond vague expectations of representing your house with honor. While prefects existed, they were few, only 2 per house per year, and their duties seemed mostly disciplinary and superficial. Percy Weasley, for example, concerned himself more with scolding students over dress code infractions than guiding or supporting younger peers. When Percy reprimanded Harry for being out of bed on his first night, there was no acknowledgement that the first years might be overwhelmed, scared, or confused. His authority was absolute, but his empathy was minimal. The design of the common rooms exacerbated this imbalance. Gryffindor's space, with its large hearth and squashy armchairs, wasn't made for separation. Older students naturally dominated the prime lounging areas, while younger ones clustered in corners or along windowsills. There were no age-specific zones, no quiet areas for reading or reflection. A group of 7th years discussing NEWT-level transfiguration could easily drown out a frightened first year trying to finish basic charms homework. The environment was inherently unregulated, built on the assumption that age hierarchy would sort itself out without incident. But such passive oversight ignored the reality of adolescent behavior and its impact on vulnerable newcomers. Ron, having grown up in a house full of brothers, navigated this chaos with relative ease. But even he was startled by the sheer confidence of the older students. "Some of them look like they've already grown beards," he whispered that first night, awed and slightly intimidated. For students without siblings like Hermione, the culture shock was more pronounced. She compensated by overperforming, memorizing rulebooks, asking questions in every class. But none of that prepared her for the silent rules that governed the common room: who spoke when, who sat where, who had the right to enforce silence or laughter. This imbalance wasn't limited to Gryffindor. In Slytherin, the mixing of ages took a darker turn. The common room, set in the dungeons, mirrored the cold, hierarchical nature of its occupants. First years were seen as pawns or irritants, useful if manipulable, disposable if not. Draco Malfoy, even as a second year, held sway over those below him with the arrogance of lineage. In The Half-Blood Prince, Pansy Parkinson, a sixth year, mocked younger students without hesitation, reinforcing a toxic pecking order. Discipline wasn't cultivated, it was enforced through scorn and exclusion. The older students didn't mentor, they lorded over. Hufflepuff, often painted as the kindest house, suffered from the same structural issue. Kindness didn't negate discomfort. Shared living quarters meant younger students were constantly exposed to teenage conversations, stress, and late-night discussions about relationships, exams, or politics of the wizarding world. There was no sanctuary for children simply trying to adjust. First years listened from their beds as their dorm mates debated whether Cedric Diggory had a chance at becoming head boy or whether the ministry was corrupt. The emotional weight of those conversations was not meant for 11-year-old ears. Ravenclaw, the House of Intellect, often assumed younger students could keep up. But knowledge doesn't equate to maturity. When Luna Lovegood joined, she was ostracized not because she was unkind or unintelligent, but because the system allowed the older students to set cultural norms without accountability. Luna's eccentricity threatened the illusion of uniform cleverness. Her age and demeanor made her an easy target, and no structure existed to protect or include her. The very space that should have fostered learning became a quiet battlefield of social exclusion. There was never any mention of counseling services or designated mentors for younger students. No teachers, heads of house, or even the legendary Dumbledore addressed the imbalance. The house system was upheld like gospel, an all-encompassing identity that erased individuality in favor of unity. But unity without structure becomes tyranny by majority. The most dominant personalities shaped the tone, while the rest adapted or suffered. It is telling that when Harry found comfort, it wasn't in the common room but in places like Hagrid's hut, the library, or later the Room of Requirement, spaces where he could control the environment and escape judgment. Even magical spaces need emotional architecture. Hogwarts, for all its enchantments, lacked the human design necessary for healthy development. A first-year student should not have to navigate the silent threat of a 17-year-old scowl just to sit near the fire. The absence of clearly defined boundaries left room for both casual cruelty and unconscious neglect. When Fred and George Weasley tested products on younger students, it was seen as humor, not exploitation. When Harry was bullied by Draco, it was labeled rivalry, not abuse. The institution romanticized house unity while ignoring the cracks within it. Imagine a system where each house had sub-quarters by year, zones for first years to bond, rooms for studying without interruption, common areas with enforced quiet hours, or rotating mentorship programs. A fifth year could be paired with a first year, not to discipline, but to support. The connection would benefit both. The elder learns empathy, the younger gains confidence, but none of this existed. Instead, Hermione sobbed in bathrooms, Neville lost his toad nightly, and Colin Creevey was mocked just for wanting to belong. The mixed-age common rooms were a boiling pot of identity confusion. A first-year struggling with homesickness might find himself ignored by older students entrenched in romantic drama or academic pressure. A young girl might overhear conversations about danger, death, or rebellion and carry that fear silently for weeks. In Order of the Phoenix, the tension reached a breaking point. Students were terrified by the rise of Voldemort, yet the house system still forced children to sleep in the same rooms as those traumatized by war, without emotional buffer or adult mediation. What did it teach? Not unity, but silence. Younger students learned to shrink themselves, to wait for their turn to speak, to avoid the couches near the fireplace. Harry, Ron, and Hermione became mentors only by necessity, not by design. In the Goblet of Fire, younger Gryffindors watched in horror as the Tri-Wizard tournament swept Harry into danger, and no one, Neither peers nor staff helped them process the fear. The common room became a theatre of whispered theories, not shared healing. The system could have been more. It could have reflected the values Hogwarts claimed to cherish: bravery, wisdom, loyalty, cunning. But instead of shaping those qualities intentionally, the school left students to absorb them through trial, error, and trauma. Discipline without structure, coexistence without boundaries, these became the norm. And for all the magic in its walls, Hogwarts remained a place where an 11-year-old boy sat quietly, too afraid to ask for the seat closest to the fire. Number 23, students can't choose houses that match goals. In the candlelit hush of the Hogwarts Great Hall, the sorting hat takes its place upon trembling first-years' heads, proclaiming their destiny in 4 syllables or less. In that single minute, under the stare of hundreds and the pressure of a school legend, a student's fate is sealed. The hat claims to see the soul, to understand desires, fears, and potential. But there's a flaw in this so-called ancient wisdom. A flaw that becomes glaring when you look beyond the theatrics. Because the hat, for all its songs and rhymes, doesn't account for dreams. It doesn't care whether a student longs to be a healer, a master of magical creatures, or a potioneer. The system assumes a personality trait is enough to define a future. And that, for students like Hermione Granger, or even Neville Longbottom, becomes a silent burden. Take the case of someone like Daphne Greengrass, a quiet, focused Slytherin girl who barely appears in the books, but is, according to Pottermore and fan lore, an exceptional student in theory-based magic. Had she been placed in Ravenclaw, where academic curiosity is worshipped, perhaps her name would have stood beside Hermione's on academic leaderboards. But the sorting hat chose ambition over aptitude, reputation over passion. Slytherin, the house with a legacy of cunning and tradition, doesn't pride itself on intellect. It prioritizes power and legacy. If a student's passions don't match the values of their house, what kind of educational experience can they truly have? Then consider Neville, the boy who lived in shadow. The hat admitted years later that it had considered placing him in Hufflepuff. "You're brave at heart," it said, and so brave he was placed. But what if Neville had indeed gone to Hufflepuff, a house renowned not for daring but for dedication and care? Herbology might have bloomed into a career much sooner, the environment might have fostered confidence earlier, and more importantly, his dream of working with magical plants might have been more directly supported. Instead, he struggled to fit into the chivalrous image of Gryffindor, often comparing himself to others who were louder, stronger, quicker with a wand. His passion became his escape, not his path. And what of potions? A subject steeped in precision, patience, and deep magical knowledge. Professor Slughorn, the head of Slytherin, practically breathes life into the subject. The common room of Slytherin is conveniently located near the dungeons, not far from the potions classroom. It becomes an unspoken truth. If you want to become a master of the cauldron, Slytherin is your safest bet. Yet the school offers no formal mentorship based on interests. Students like Colin Creevey or Seamus Finnegan might have had a better grasp of their skills had the system allowed them to pursue specific interests, not house stereotypes. There is no elective guidance, no strategic placement, no career-driven support, just a hat and a whisper. Harry Potter himself might be the most famous victim of this flawed ritual. "You could be great, you know," the hat told him, considering Slytherin. But Harry insisted on Gryffindor. It was the closest thing to agency the sorting ever gave, and even then it was framed as a rare exception. He chose bravery over cunning, but not necessarily because that aligned with his ambitions. He didn't even know his ambitions yet, and he was 11. That moment, shaped more by instinct and fear than rational thought, determined his 4-year experience, his peer group, and how teachers treated him. Imagine if the hat had considered his future more than his traits, if it had placed him somewhere based on how best to guide his strengths. perhaps he would have been less plagued by comparisons, by doubts, by the weight of a house that expected heroism. Snape's story paints an even starker contrast. A boy who loved the dark corners of knowledge, obsessed with magical theory, potions and the limits of spells. Placed in Slytherin, where he fit in ambition but not in heart. His true self was fragmented. Part of him loved Lily Evans, a Gryffindor, and another part wanted recognition that his house couldn't offer in ways he truly needed. Snape's bitterness, his double life, perhaps even his fall into darkness, could be traced back to a system that valued house tradition more than emotional complexity. Had he been in Ravenclaw, perhaps surrounded by fellow researchers, his talents might have flourished in healthier ways. But there was no room for that kind of possibility. The hat saw one layer, not the entire soul. And what of Hermione, brightest witch of her age, craving knowledge like air? Why was she not in Ravenclaw? The hat said she had a ready mind, but decided Gryffindor was a better fit due to her courage. But wouldn't a structured academic environment have nurtured her more deeply? Wouldn't Ravenclaw have celebrated her hunger for answers instead of mocking it as know-it-all behavior? In Gryffindor, Hermione was exceptional but often lonely in her academic pursuits. She had to create her own structure, build her own path, often isolated from her housemates' priorities. Her house rewarded action, not preparation. So she learned to fight. But what if she had been placed somewhere that rewarded her nature instead of forcing her to adapt? The very architecture of Hogwarts reinforces this rigid division. Each house has its own dormitory, common room, even its own table during meals. Students of different houses rarely mingle outside classes or Quidditch. This separation limits collaboration, friendship, and even healthy competition. If a young witch wants to explore magical creatures but ends up in a house where such interests are laughed at, what motivation does she have to pursue her dream? The system assumes identity is static, that 11-year-olds know themselves, when in reality, Hogwarts is supposed to be where students discover who they are. But how can they do that when their environment is designed to mold them into an ideal that might not fit? The career path system is almost non-existent. We know from Order of the Phoenix that students meet with their heads of house to discuss possible futures. McGonagall explains OWL requirements, and occasionally, a teacher like Slughorn might nudge a student in a direction he favors. But these are rare, informal moments. There's no central structure, no individualized curriculum, no mentorship that ensures alignment between passion and study. No student is allowed to request a house that fits their desired future. No opportunity is given for a transfer or interdisciplinary mentorship. Once sorted, you are shaped by that house's philosophy, not by your own calling. And in many cases, the sorting hat seems to favor family legacy over individuality. Ron Weasley was practically guaranteed Gryffindor, not because of his personality alone, but because every Weasley before him had been placed there. The system encourages continuity over nuance. What if Ron had gone to Hufflepuff, where his loyalty and kindness would have shined brighter than the competitive shadows of his brothers? What if Ginny, so fiercely independent, had been placed in Slytherin to challenge expectations? But that's not how the system works. The hat, ancient as it may be, upholds the traditions more than the child. There is also the issue of prestige. Slytherin is known for producing powerful wizards, Ravenclaw for intellectuals, Gryffindor for heroes, Hufflepuff for leftovers. This reputation impacts student self-worth. A young boy placed in Hufflepuff might believe he has already failed before he's begun. No amount of kindness can erase a lifetime of stigma, especially when it's built into the school's culture. Ambitious students might pretend not to be, fearing association with Slytherin's dark history, and so they bury dreams under layers of house loyalty. They compromise identity for acceptance. The system does not change with time. Students aren't re-evaluated, interests aren't explored. Even in their 6th and 7th years, when specialization becomes important, house restrictions remain rigid. The same walls, the same dormitories, the same expectations. A Ravenclaw who finds passion in magical dueling must either train alone or try to assimilate into Gryffindor's culture. A Slytherin who discovers a love for Muggle studies may find herself mocked, unsupported. The sorting system discourages flexibility. It turns dreams into hobbies and house pride into confinement. In the end, Hogwarts offers a magical education, but not a personal one. It assumes that the Sorting Hat's first impression is the truest, that one moment can define a childhood, but it cannot. Dreams are fragile, talents grow like vines, twisting, surprising, often needing the right light to flourish. And while the hat may be wise, it is still a hat. It cannot see what a child may one day become. Number 24. No academic focus per house. In the shadowed halls of Hogwarts Castle, behind the towering portraits and echoing staircases, lies a system so ingrained in the magical world that few stop to question it. The 4 houses, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff, promise to reflect the values of courage, cunning, wit, and loyalty. Yet as the years pass and students march through their timetables, a peculiar pattern emerges. Regardless of house, every student studies the same curriculum. Hermione Granger, with all her Ravenclaw-worthy intellect, sat through the same herbology lessons as Neville Longbottom, whose affinity for magical plants was second to none. The Sorting Hat, that ancient arbiter of destiny, might proclaim your soul aligned with bravery or wisdom, but once sorted, the path is oddly uniform. It is in this lack of academic differentiation that the house system begins to unravel. If Ravenclaws are the seekers of knowledge, why aren't they granted advanced instruction in ancient runes, arithmancy, or experimental charms by default? The very traits that define the house are not nourished in the classroom. Luna Lovegood, whose curious mind and abstract reasoning set her apart, attended the same base-level divination class as students who scoffed at the subject. She might have benefited from a tailored study into magical theories, but Hogwarts offered no such path. There is irony in a system that proudly divides students by values and yet treats them identically in every academic sense. When we look to Slytherin, the contradiction sharpens. Slytherins are known for ambition, resourcefulness, and a certain strategic intelligence. Their emblematic traits should thrive in subjects like potions, an art of patience and precision, or defense against the dark arts, which demands cunning and awareness. Yet Draco Malfoy sat beside Ron Weasley and Seamus Finnegan in every shared class, receiving the same lectures and assignments. Even Severus Snape, the potions master and a proud Slytherin, taught without distinguishing the potential in his own house's special affinity for his craft. There was no advanced potions track for Slytherins to master the fine intricacies of the draught of living death or the wolfsbane potion. Gryffindors, for all their lion-hearted reputation, never once saw dueling made a focal point of their education. Harry Potter, whose natural instincts made him a formidable opponent even in his early years, had to seek extra instruction through the DA meetings in the Room of Requirement, an organization born not from Hogwarts' official design, but from its failure to adapt. Professor McGonagall, herself a Gryffindor, never offered house-specific enrichment in spells or tactical magical combat. And yet, isn't courage best expressed when standing wand-to-wand against dark forces? The opportunity was there, waiting in the shadows of unused classrooms and dusty curriculum guides, but never seized. Then there is Hufflepuff. Loyal, hard-working, and often overlooked, their skills align closely with the practical magic of herbology, care of magical creatures, and perhaps even magical culinary arts. A field seldom mentioned, but likely important in any wizarding society. Pomona Sprout, the head of Hufflepuff, was the herbology professor, yet her students had no formal advantage in the subject beyond proximity to their head of house. Zachariah Smith learned alongside Lavender Brown, despite his house supposedly favoring patience and earthy magic. Why not give Hufflepuffs a specialized track in magical sustainability or potion ingredient cultivation? The potential for specialization was immense, yet the curriculum remained static. This uniformity makes the house system feel performative, a sorting of personality rather than purpose. It reduces the Hogwarts houses to nothing more than glorified dormitories and color-coded scarves. Rivalries flourish, but not academic diversity. The Triwizard Tournament, with all its grandeur, allowed students to showcase personal strength and skill, but offered no insight into how their house training set them apart. If anything, the tasks demanded cross-disciplinary excellence, something the curriculum did little to encourage or support in a house-based way. Fred and George Weasley, for example, were brilliant innovators. Their joke shop inventions required a mastery of charms, potions, and magical product design. They were Gryffindors, yes, but their talents aligned just as much with Ravenclaw intellect or Slytherin cleverness. Had there been a track for entrepreneurial magic or enchantment engineering, the Weasley twins might have been cultivated in ways that benefited both Hogwarts and the wizarding world. Instead, they operated in the margins, finding their education not in classrooms but in chaos and trial. The case of Hermione is equally telling. A Muggle-born witch of extraordinary talent, she was sorted into Gryffindor for her bravery. But she spent countless hours self-studying, taking on an impossibly heavy schedule, using a time turner to attend more classes. Her desire for deeper magical understanding was so intense that she bent time itself. Why didn't Hogwarts offer a Ravenclaw-style academic track for students like her? Why did she have to overexert herself to explore the magical field she loved? And what about Neville Longbottom, whose journey from timid boy to wartime hero was rooted in his connection to herbology? His growth wasn't fostered by the house system, it emerged in spite of it. Had Hufflepuff been a vocational house for earth magic, he might have flourished earlier, finding confidence in his abilities long before the chaos of war forced it out of him, but instead he was seen as the underdog of Gryffindor, always compared to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, whose talents lay elsewhere. The professors themselves might have benefited from a specialized structure. Phileas Flitwick, with his duel-winning background and charms mastery, could have designed an elite track for Gryffindors in combat and spellcraft. Snape could have nurtured Slytherin protégés in the intricate arts of potion design and magical poisons. Even Sybil Trelawney, so often mocked, might have found more traction with Ravenclaws inclined toward abstract thought and visionary studies. Yet Hogwarts, for all its ancient prestige, clung to a one-size-fits-all approach. House points, too, lose meaning in this context. If all students are given the same academic tools, how can the achievements of one house be compared meaningfully to another? A Ravenclaw winning points for academic brilliance is judged by the same standards as a Gryffindor praised for courage. The system is symbolic rather than functional. It breeds competition but not depth. It sorts but it does not cultivate. Even the sorting hat, that sentient artifact of tradition, seems to question its own relevance. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal, it sings, or yet in wise old Ravenclaw if you've a ready mind. Yet once the song ends and the cheers die down, the academic experience flattens. Ready minds sit idle in classes designed for general comprehension. Ambitious hearts wait for opportunities that never come. Brave souls fight for causes outside the classroom because the system offers no internal outlet for their fire. The absence of house-based specializations reflects a deeper reluctance in the wizarding world to adapt. Magic, for all its wonder, seems curiously stuck in tradition. The idea of tailoring education to student strengths feels logical. Muggle schools have embraced specialization for centuries. Hogwarts, however, resists. Caught in a loop of sameness, students repeat the same incantations, memorize the same potion recipes, write the same essays, regardless of what makes them unique. In the end, the Hogwarts houses offer identity, but not development. They give students a crest and a colour, a rivalry and a room, but little else that justifies their foundational role in wizarding education. The potential is there, buried in the personalities of the founders, in the ambitions of the students, in the quiet corridors of the castle itself. But without academic specialization, the houses remain hollow symbols. A brave Gryffindor and a clever Ravenclaw walk into class and sit side by side. The differences between them are philosophical, not practical, and perhaps in a world of dragons and destiny, that's the most mundane magic of all. Number 25. Certain houses always win. Always seemed like a grand tradition. The House Cup, that shimmering trophy at the heart of Hogwarts' competitive spirit. But beneath the glittering surface lies a truth too easily ignored. The game was never fair. Year after year, Gryffindor somehow snatched victory at the last moment, usually with a dazzling smile from Albus Dumbledore and a convenient allocation of last-minute points. It was a story told so often that no one questioned its logic anymore. But for the quiet corners of the castle, for Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, it was a cruel reminder that the spotlight shone only where the headmaster allowed it to. Slytherin, once dominant in the decade before Harry Potter's arrival, found itself demonized from the first book onward. Slytherin has won the House Cup for the past 7 years, Professor McGonagall said in Philosopher's Stone. But when Harry entered Hogwarts, the pattern broke dramatically. Gryffindor hadn't won for a long time, and now they were suddenly unbeatable. And not through consistent effort, no, the victory often hinged on a dramatic twist, where Dumbledore delivered a surprise batch of points to Harry and his friends for their bravery, always just enough to beat Slytherin by a hair. 4 for courage, 10 for loyalty, 50 for being Harry Potter. The most egregious example took place at the end of Harry's first year. Slytherin had already been announced as the winner. Their green and silver banners hung proudly in the Great Hall. Then, in a ceremonial twist, Dumbledore stood and began bestowing points like candy. Hermione received 50 for cool use of intellect, Ron 50 for best played game of wizard chess, and Harry 60 for pure nerve and outstanding courage. Finally, Neville, who hadn't even gone to the dungeons, was handed 10 points for standing up to his friends. The total shifted just enough to push Gryffindor ahead. The banners changed, the hall erupted in cheers, but the Slytherins sat in stunned silence, the victory they'd already celebrated stolen in front of their eyes. It wasn't just once. In Chamber of Secrets, Gryffindor's victory was again a product of heroic deeds rather than daily discipline. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw barely earned a footnote. There's no mention of their efforts, no records of whether they ever held the lead or even came close. Their triumphs, quiet, humble, consistent, never earned fireworks or raucous applause. Zachariah Smith from Hufflepuff might have been unpleasant, but he represented a house that never saw its students publicly celebrated. In the pages of Hogwarts history, they were background characters, spectators to a drama that unfolded without them. Ravenclaw, a house built on intelligence and wit, had perhaps the best academic students in the school. Characters like Terry Boot, Padma Patil, and even the eccentric Luna Lovegood represented the kind of brilliance that Hogwarts supposedly valued. But when the House Cup rolled around, their contributions vanished into thin air. Not once in 7 years was it noted that Ravenclaw led the scoreboard, or even challenged for the cup. Their victories were internal, unseen. The system didn't reward quiet wisdom, it only applauded loud acts of heroism. One could argue that bravery deserves to be celebrated, but when that bravery is rewarded so consistently and so disproportionately, it ceases to be a meritocracy. Instead, it becomes favoritism. The House Cup was meant to inspire a spirit of fair competition, to push students from all houses to strive for excellence in every form. But the narrative told another story, that only Gryffindor and sometimes Slytherin, when they weren't being vilified, were playing the game. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw were spectators, their efforts ignored by the system designed to uplift them. Even Professor Sprout, the head of Hufflepuff, rarely saw her students awarded for their loyalty, hard work, or patience, traits the school allegedly valued. Cedric Diggory, a student who perfectly embodied the virtues of his house, was one of the few Hufflepuffs ever held up as a model student. He was handsome, kind, talented, and fair. And he died. His death served to elevate Harry's journey rather than honor Cedric's legacy. No points were awarded to Hufflepuff in his memory. No mention of their house's grief or their strength in standing behind one of their own. Perhaps most telling is that the rules of the House Cup seemed alarmingly flexible. Professors could award or deduct points arbitrarily, often based on personal feelings. Snape, biased as he was, frequently deducted points from Gryffindor for minor infractions. McGonagall, in contrast, overlooked much from her lions. And then there was Dumbledore, the ultimate arbiter, who made no attempt to hide his favoritism. The headmaster's control over the scoreboard undermined the whole purpose of the competition. What message did that send to the students, that rules were bendable if you were special enough? During the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire, the idea of fair competition was supposedly paramount. But even there, favoritism bled into the process. Harry was entered against his will, and while that in itself was unfair, the result was a series of challenges where rules bent around his survival. When it came to points, they were distributed in vague ways. Fleur lost hers for not finishing. Cedric and Harry got the same score, even though Harry helped Cedric. The idea of merit became foggy, subjective, and again Hufflepuff lost its shining moment to the narrative arc of a Gryffindor. The final year at Hogwarts was defined by chaos, as the school fell under the shadow of the Carrows and Voldemort's rule. But even in that madness, the question remained, what had the House Cup meant all along? Did anyone remember if it was even awarded in that 7th year? Did it matter anymore? Years of favoritism had already robbed it of legitimacy. Students no longer believed it was a symbol of honor or fairness. It had become a tool for storytelling, a device to punctuate the victory of certain characters while pushing others into silence. When Fred and George Weasley left school in a blaze of fireworks, it was Gryffindor spirit celebrated again. No points deducted for public disruption, no detentions handed out. It was framed as a moment of rebellion and humor. But what if a Slytherin had done it, or a Hufflepuff? Would it still be seen as charming, or would it be punished as disrespect? The biases were not only academic, they were cultural. Hogwarts had built a system where certain houses were allowed to colour outside the lines, while others were expected to stay neatly within them. Even the Sorting Hat hinted at the problem. In Order of the Phoenix, it sang, "Though condemned I am to split you, still I worry that it's wrong, though I must fulfil my duty and must quarter every tongue." The hat itself acknowledged that the division it enforced caused division. The House Cup exacerbated that rift. Instead of unity, it fostered tribalism. Instead of healthy competition, it cultivated favoritism. And instead of celebrating all kinds of greatness, it only spotlighted one. Neville Longbottom, once the overlooked Gryffindor, became a war hero in his own right. But his turning point came when he was awarded 10 points for standing up to his friends. Not for bravery in battle, not for enduring personal loss, but for a moment of social courage. A meaningful moment, yes, but one that conveniently allowed Gryffindor to win the cup. The timing was too perfect, the symbolism too heavy-handed. It was storytelling, not justice. What makes it worse is that the House Cup could have been a truly beautiful tradition, a space to celebrate different kinds of excellence, intellectual, social, moral, physical, a reward system that honored kindness as much as courage, cooperation, as much as independence. But instead it reduced years of schooling into a stage where only a few players got to shine and everyone else waited behind the curtains. After 7 years at Hogwarts, a Hufflepuff student looked back and saw no moment of triumph. What message did they carry into the world? That their quiet strength was invisible? That their discipline wasn't worthy of applause? The same goes for Ravenclaws, who built magical theories and aced every exam. They weren't awarded standing ovations. They weren't cheered as they left the Great Hall. There's a reason the books close with the end of Voldemort and not with a final House Cup ceremony. Because by the end, it simply didn't matter. The magic was never in the trophy, it was in the people. But imagine how much more powerful Hogwarts could have been if every student in every house saw their value not just reflected in private, but celebrated publicly, equally and honestly. Number 26. Sorting ceremony is a public embarrassment. The sorting ceremony at Hogwarts is one of the most iconic traditions in the Harry Potter universe, yet it harbours a disturbing flaw that has gone mostly unquestioned. Imagine, for a moment, being 11 years old, stepping into an enormous hall filled with hundreds of strangers, many of them much older than you, their eyes trained on your every move. You are tired from your first journey away from home, overwhelmed by magic you've never seen before, and suddenly you are called to the front, alone. All eyes are on you as you sit on a stool and place an ancient, ragged hat on your head, a hat that can read your mind and soul, and worse, speaks out loud. This is not a private evaluation of one's strengths and fears. It is a performance, and not just any performance, but one that can broadcast your innermost traits to a crowd of teenagers, some of whom are eager to judge. When Hermione Granger was sorted, the hat declared, "Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself." Had it spoken another word or two, her secret wish to be in Gryffindor could have been exposed to snide whispers from Ravenclaws or Slytherins who might have sneered at her for craving status over intellect. And then there's Neville Longbottom. The hat nearly placed him in Hufflepuff, yet ultimately sent him to Gryffindor. One can only imagine the internal chaos Neville felt as his nervousness was compounded by the hat's commentary. For someone already struggling with self-worth, the possibility of public indecision from the sorting hat is nothing short of a nightmare. What if the hat had said out loud, "You doubt yourself, don't you, Neville?" It very well could have, and then what? Years of teasing, labels that stick like magical glue. Even Harry Potter himself, the boy everyone already knew about before he stepped through the castle doors, was subjected to this vulnerability. The hat whispered temptations of Slytherin greatness to him, and although it ultimately kept that moment private, the truth is it could have spoken it aloud. And if it had, a school already buzzing with gossip and suspicion would have never let him live it down. The moment Draco Malfoy heard that Harry might have belonged in Slytherin, it would have been social ammunition for years. What makes this ritual particularly alarming is its permanence. One moment, one hat, one decision. And the way that decision is delivered publicly, dramatically cements its impact. It turns an intimate judgment of character into an act of theatre. Children who have not yet even unpacked their trunks are being defined, labelled, and categorised before they've had a single class. They are essentially being branded in front of the entire student body, and this branding is not neutral. Gryffindors are brave, Ravenclaws are smart, Hufflepuffs are kind, Slytherins are ambitious and dangerous, some would say. The stereotypes are so ingrained that even first years have heard the whispers on the train. There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin. This public spectacle doesn't simply assign students to a house, it puts them under a microscope. The second the hat yells Slytherin, a wave of judgment follows. The Gryffindors groan, the Hufflepuffs exchange wary looks, and the Ravenclaws murmur their doubts. Imagine being sorted into Slytherin and having to walk the length of the hall amid scattered applause and scattered sneers. No child deserves to be introduced to a new chapter of their life with such psychological pressure. What's even stranger is how normalized this is within the magical world. No professor steps in to soothe the anxiety. No enchantment softens the hat's voice or hides its words. and no attempt is made to make this process more humane. In any Muggle educational institution, public assessments of character would be considered unethical, especially when they affect how children are viewed by their peers. Why then, in a school as prestigious as Hogwarts, is the most formative moment of a child's magical education turned into a performance? We know that bullying exists at Hogwarts, it's not a secret. Severus Snape was relentlessly mocked during his school years. James Potter and Sirius Black made a public hobby out of humiliating him. And much of that was rooted in the divisions created by house identity. Gryffindors and Slytherins often see each other as natural enemies, not classmates. By making the sorting ceremony public, Hogwarts nurtures this division from day one. It sets up a visual scoreboard: who went where, who is brave, who is cunning, who is lesser. That is not education, that is categorization. The irony, of course, is that the sorting hat itself is capable of nuanced thought. It recognizes the complexities in each child. It acknowledged Harry's inner struggle, Hermione's ambition, and Neville's fear. But the students around them don't hear those subtle insights, they only hear the name of the house, and from that they draw conclusions, they laugh, they scoff, they assume. And for some children, those assumptions can echo throughout their entire Hogwarts experience. Even Ron Weasley, a boy from a well-known wizarding family, felt the weight of public expectation. As he walked toward the sorting hat, he carried the burden of his brother's reputations. What if it had said, "Not as brave as your brother Charlie," or "Not as clever as Percy"? The hat, to its credit, didn't, but the chance was there. Ron already felt insecure enough. A single poorly worded comment could have crushed his spirit. It's important to remember that Hogwarts students are children. They are not fully formed adults who can brush off embarrassment or navigate ridicule with poise. They are young, impressionable, and emotionally vulnerable. Making the sorting public not only subjects them to instant labeling, but also opens them to ridicule that can follow them for years. A mistake in that moment, or simply a misunderstood comment, can shape their entire identity. There is also the matter of agency. The sorting hat makes its choice, often considering the student's input, but that conversation is still one-sided. What if a child is terrified of being in a certain house because of stories they've heard, and the hat ignores that fear? What if that moment becomes not just stressful, but traumatic? And worse, what if the hat shares their fears out loud? "Oh, you're afraid of being in Hufflepuff? That's curious." That single sentence could make a child a laughingstock before they've even found their bed. Why does Hogwarts cling so tightly to this spectacle? Is it tradition? Is it showmanship? Or is it simply oversight? Whatever the reason, it betrays the very mission of a school: to nurture, to protect, to educate. The sorting should be a thoughtful, respectful process, one that honors the individual, not parades them. It should be private. It should be quiet. It should be safe, not a circus of judgment where peers become judges and children are reduced to house traits. There are better ways. The sorting could be done privately before the feast, in a smaller setting with only staff present. The students could discover their house quietly, be led to their dormitory, and be introduced to their housemates in an environment of welcome, not spectacle. The excitement of the Great Hall would still exist, but the burden of vulnerability would be lifted. Hogwarts prides itself on being a place of wonder and growth, but wonder should not come at the expense of dignity. Growth should not begin with exposure. If we examine the sorting ceremony through the eyes of a child, any child, we see not magic, but risk, not tradition, but trauma waiting to happen. And when we look at Harry, Neville, Hermione, Ron, and all the rest, we realize they did not become heroes because of how they were sorted. They became heroes despite it. Number 27. Sorting ignores hidden potential. In the candlelit silence of the great hall, every year the same ritual unfolds. A battered, wrinkled hat is placed upon the head of an 11-year-old child, and within seconds their identity is supposedly set for life. Gryffindor for the brave, Ravenclaw for the clever, Hufflepuff for the kind, Slytherin for the ambitious. The Sorting Hat, ancient and supposedly wise, is tasked with glimpsing into the minds and hearts of children barely out of their primary schooling, and making a lifelong decision based on what it finds. But beneath the enchantment and spectacle lies a system that is far less magical than it appears. It is, in truth, flawed at its core, because at 11, a child is not a complete person, and many of the traits the hat seeks are hidden, dormant, or simply not yet formed. Consider Neville Longbottom, the boy who trembled when holding a wand and was nearly left behind by his own family. The Sorting Hat debated sending him to Hufflepuff, but finally placed him in Gryffindor, a decision that seemed, for years, to be a mismatch. Neville was timid, insecure, and woefully unprepared for the expectations of bravery placed upon his shoulders. He was bullied by Draco Malfoy, humiliated in potions, and forgotten in the shadow of Harry Potter. And yet, by the final book, Neville stands against Voldemort, brandishing the sword of Gryffindor, and leads the rebellion at Hogwarts. He becomes the very embodiment of courage, but he was not born that way. He grew into it. The hat had guessed correctly, but it was still just a guess. Hermione Granger's case is even more telling. A Ravenclaw on paper, a prodigy who devoured books with a hunger unmatched by her peers, she was placed in Gryffindor. The Sorting Hat stated, "You're very clever, not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh yes, and a thirst to prove yourself." But it ultimately said Gryffindor. She herself admitted to Professor McGonagall that she had hoped to be in Ravenclaw. What the hat sensed was her boldness, her willingness to challenge authority, to fight for what's right, as she did with Spew and Dumbledore's army. But at 11, Hermione's strongest quality was her intellect. That side of her only became secondary much later, shaped by circumstance. Her destiny could easily have gone another way if the hat had chosen intellect over courage. The flaw is not merely in the decisions themselves, but in the assumption that such decisions can be accurately made in mere seconds. The hat is expected to identify the core of a child's personality based on fleeting emotions, shallow memories, and incomplete self-awareness. How could it possibly know that a boy who is quiet now will grow into a leader? Or that a girl who seems selfish might one day sacrifice everything for her friends? The hat says it can read thoughts, but thoughts at 11 are transient things. Children are not finished stories, they are prologues. Take Draco Malfoy. The hat placed him in Slytherin, which seemed fitting, ambition, cunning, and pride. But Draco's story is not one of simple villainy. In Half-Blood Prince, we see a boy unraveling, trembling in fear as he fails to complete his mission to kill Dumbledore. He's not evil, he's scared, he's a child playing in a world of war. What if he had been placed in Gryffindor, forced to grow beside Harry, Ron, and Hermione? Could his bravery have emerged in a different way? Could his soul have been saved sooner? Then there's Luna Lovegood, who floats through the corridors of Hogwarts like a dream. Placed in Ravenclaw, presumably for her unorthodox intelligence and sharp intuition, she might have equally belonged in Hufflepuff, given her kindness and loyalty. Luna is a character who defies categorization. She is not the academic type like Cho Chang or Terry Boot. Her mind does not operate with conventional logic, but with something much stranger and more poetic. The hat saw intelligence, but it missed everything else. And what about Peter Pettigrew? Sorted into Gryffindor, the House of the Brave, he ultimately betrays his best friends and aids in the murder of James and Lily Potter. There is no bravery in his actions, only cowardice. His story is a tragedy built upon the false assumption that courage once burned inside him. The hat made a mistake, an irreversible one. Perhaps it saw only his desire to belong to be accepted by stronger personalities. Perhaps it confused dependency with loyalty. Regardless, Peter became the antithesis of a Gryffindor, and that misjudgment cost lives. The system assumes children are already formed, but even in the Muggle world we know this is false. Career tests taken at 11 rarely predict where a person will end up. Someone who dreams of being a firefighter might become a musician. A shy child might become a public speaker. Talent is not always loud. It does not always scream for attention. It waits in silence and blooming slowly, unpredictably. By the time it arrives, the Sorting Hat's decision has long been made, carved into a student's identity like a brand. Fred and George Weasley are another curious case, brilliant in their own right, inventors, strategists, pranksters, but not particularly studious or traditionally brave. Their brilliance was chaotic, and their rule-breaking was both a form of rebellion and an expression of creative genius. They could have thrived in Ravenclaw or even Slytherin, but the Sorting Hat saw their boldness and labelled it courage. It was not wrong, but it was far too simplistic. The danger lies not in the Hat's guesses, but in how those guesses are treated as truths. A child told they are a Slytherin may begin to act more cunning, even if that quality was never dominant. A Hufflepuff may bury their ambition, a Ravenclaw might suppress emotional instincts. Identity, once labelled, is difficult to unlearn, and the sorting system turns that label into a social structure complete with rivalries, stereotypes, and expectations. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore says it is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. But the Sorting Hat system contradicts this. It does not allow children to choose who they want to become. It assigns them a path based on limited information and forces them to live with it. Harry himself nearly begged not to be in Slytherin, and the Hat relented. But what about students who don't know they have a choice? Ginny Weasley, fierce and independent, spends her first year overshadowed by her brothers. Sorted into Gryffindor, she grows into her strength later, but it's not the Sorting Hat that helps her do so. It's experience, pain, and the process of growing up. Her strength comes from surviving the Chamber of Secrets, from resisting the Carrows, from loving without fear. None of that could have been seen at 11. She had to become who she was meant to be, slowly. The school values the act of sorting as a rite of passage, a tradition. But traditions are not always right. The world has changed since the Hat was created, and the nature of childhood has changed too. Modern Hogwarts does not need rigid categories. It needs flexibility, mentorship, and time. Time to allow students to evolve. Time to let their strengths surface. Not every first year is a fully realized Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, or Slytherin. Some are simply children.